Support for Swan Song is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. Megas has returned to the WonderSwan for another horror game in their novel theater series. That's right, I just barely missed the perfect timing for an elusive WonderSwan horror game episode to come out right after Halloween. This episode I'm taking a look at Ring Infinity, one of two video game adaptations of the Japanese horror franchise Ringu. It was developed by Megas, published by Kadokawa Shoten, and was released on August 10th, 2000. Ringu is a multimedia supernatural horror franchise that first got its start with a 1991 novel of the same name by Suzuki Koji, published by Kadokawa Shoten. The novel revolves around a reporter named Asakawa Kazuyuki investigating the death of 3 teenagers. He discovers an unmarked videotape warning the viewer they have 1 week left to live, and then abruptly cuts to commercial when it would have revealed how to avoid the curse. The rest of the novel is spent alongside Asakawa's friend Takayama Ryuji trying to place together the truth about this curse, its origin, and how to avoid dying if you watch one of those tapes. While the novel series does form one coherent continuity, the movies largely branched off of the novels and are loosely tied around the concept of the cursed videotape and its creator Yamamura Sadako. The manga adaptations sit somewhere in the middle, with about 2/3 of them being direct adaptations of the novels, and the rest being movie tie-ins or original works. 90s kids probably learned about Ringu from the 2002 Hollywood adaptation The Ring, which is an Americanized version of the 1998 Japanese movie, kicking off a wave of Japanese horror adaptations in North America. Many years ago, I looked at Terrors, another horror game released on the WonderSwan by the same developer, and it marked the first entry in their novel theater series. By the mid-90s, Chunsoft hit it big in Japan with their sound novel concept, which consisted of visual novel games carried by atmospheric audio presentation. Their first 2 titles, Otogiriso and Kamaitachi no Yoru, were both horror games which managed to properly convey their eerie atmosphere despite just being text on static backgrounds. These games were hugely influential in Japan at the time and seem to be the direct inspiration for the novel theater series, which borrows the same playbook. The novel theater series is explicitly positioned as being designed for headphone play. Headphone output on the WonderSwan has access to 16-bit stereo audio, branded by Bandai as HyperVoice, as opposed to the internal speaker's 8-bit mono output. This is a little awkward on the WonderSwan, as the hardware itself didn't have a headphone jack, but a headphone adapter was available, and bundles were sold including the adapter with both Terrors and Ring Infinity. Ring Infinity puts you in the shoes of a high school boy who comes into possession of a videotape rumored to be cursed. While you're at school, you hear a girl in another class scream and try to rescue her, but instead end up witnessing her death. Later on, you end up watching that so-called cursed tape, and as you watch it, you have a hazy vision of spooky imagery and floating characters hinting at your impending death. Things aren't quite as explicit as they are in the novel. You aren't even sure how much of what you saw in the tape was real, or if it was just a dream or hallucination. You don't know how much time you've got left to live, or if the curse is even real. You don't know if there's anything you can do to save yourself either. All of that investigation is left to the player by exploring a branching path narrative which will have you playing through the game multiple times to piece it all together. Ring Infinity supported the WonderGate accessory, which allowed your WonderSwan to pair up with an NTT Docomo Mappa-enabled mobile phone, and download additional scenarios which put you in the shoes of the protagonist's best friend instead. Ring Infinity is famous on the Japanese internet for one thing: its ending. For 16 years following its release, Ring Infinity was considered to be unbeatable, as all 3 endings players managed to find on their own appeared to be bad endings. In order for this story to make any sense, I will need to spoil the ending of the game, so skip forward to the timestamp on screen if you're interested in not being spoiled. All of this section is a loose translation and paraphrasing of a 2017 blog post by Red Capote, which I will link in the description. At the end of the 3rd and final chapter of Ring Infinity, there are 3 possible outcomes. You're pushed into a well by the heroine, you push the heroine down into a well, or you and the heroine are both pushed into a well. None of these were considered to be good endings. If you're pushed into the well, you die. If the heroine is pushed into a well, your main character's mental health collapses. If both of you are pushed into a well, you both go missing and presumably die. Upon getting any of these endings, the game just loops right back to Chapter 1, and the only perceptible change is that the rumors which are spread around school are slightly different. So what's the deal? Following the ROM analysis that took place on a 2-channel message board, it was determined that there were indeed only 3 endings in the game, but it was now possible to discern through mechanical analysis and sleuthing through old emails what the intended best ending was all along. Ring Infinity tracks your ending outcome with two variables, terror points and scenario points. If you have 5 or more terror points, you are locked into being pushed into the well, no matter what your scenario points are. If you stay below 5 terror points, there are 2 possible routes based on your scenario points. If you have 2 or less scenario points, you will fall into the well with the heroine, and if you have 3 or more, the heroine will fall into the well alone. So now we have to determine developer intent. Which ending is intended to be the best ending? Well, for that, we need to thank people who hoard old emails, specifically ancient Wondergate emails. One of the hints sent in one of the Wondergate emails said that in the 3rd chapter, your devotion to the heroine will be key. Through analysis of the game's code, it was determined that choosing branches that prioritize the heroine lowers your scenario points, which means that the ending requiring the least scenario points, the one where you both fall in together, is likely to be considered the best ending. There is some poetry to all of this. The looping nature of the game mirrors the infinity symbol in the game's title, and the loop of the cursed videotape's propagation, making you wonder if this mystery was intentional to begin with. People used to joke that the only people who had ever seen the game's true ending all died from having seen it. Much like how the way to escape the curse was overwritten by a random advertisement in the original novel, the hint that would ultimately bring closure to this whole mystery became impossible to find due to the closure of the Wondergate service. There is one place where this game is a pretty big disappointment, and surprisingly, that's the audio. Terrors was incredibly immersive, and it felt like a true successor to the Chunsoft horror sound novel Throne, even if they oversold it a bit by trying to call it 3D audio. Ring Infinity, on the other hand, just doesn't justify its inclusion in the novel theater series. It had far less background audio than I was expecting, and what's there just isn't impressive in any way. This is just speculation, but Ring Infinity does have some pretty impressive animated sequences, specifically whenever the cursed videotape is shown, whereas Terrors didn't really feature any meaningful animation at all. It's possible cartridge space that could have gone towards a more immersive audio treatment instead had to be used for the sequences, though I'm not sure the math adds up there. Despite the situation with the ending, I don't think Ring Infinity is a bad way to dip your toe into the franchise if you can read Japanese. The game takes place in its own continuity, but still contains enough of the series' trademark tropes to feel like a fulfilling Ringu experience. Sure is a shame about the lackluster presentation though.